Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel. Well, hey everybody, I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Can you believe it's Thursday again? A whole week is going to pass since Thanksgiving. It's another Thirsty for Theory Thursday. We have a great panel of guests assembled today. We have Kaboom Blam Zoom, we have BB, we have Christy, and we have Sam. And today we're going to talk about the new release phone call. We'd all like to thank Kaboom for actually doing the FOIA to get those phone calls released. Everybody should give him an extra thank you. He does a lot of this stuff with his own money. He's got to pay for shipping. He's got to pay for the calls himself. We'd also like to thank Zoe for getting them uploaded. And we'd also like to thank Christy for taking the time to listen to every single call in chronological order and taking notes on these calls and providing her insight on what she's learned with us. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and it's kind of like panning for gold. You pan through several tons of dirt before you get a nugget of gold there, and it's not an easy task. And thank everybody who's putting in the hard work to do so. So what we thought we'd do was we would go through some of the some of the calls. We'll give you guys references to what the calls are. We'll have some notes in the description for the video that will allow you to jump back to the specific calls that we're talking about. But we'll also say the numbers if you want to write them down yourself as we're going along. What I where we wanted to start was at some of the beginning calls, right at the beginning, and even some of the older calls, starting in with around calls number 4 and 6. And Christy, could you sort of introduce us to what we hear sort of in the beginning and give us your feeling about what we learned from these calls?
Absolutely. Well, like you said, call number 4 and call number 6 were very early on. They were in November when Steven was first arrested. And at this point, he's only been charged with the gun possession. There is no murder charges yet. And the call number 4 that you're referring to is when he's talking to Carla Chase. He calls his niece, Carla. She's pretty much filling him in on what's been going on at the salvage yard. And she pretty much tells him law enforcement really isn't telling them much. And the only way they're learning anything is through the media as well. One of the things that they discuss in that phone call is Steven is confused at how they found bones, because at this point he's been told that there's been bones found in his pit. Call number 4 happens on November 11th. And when were the bones found? The 8th, the 9th? I don't remember. So he's only been told about, I think you're right. I can't, it's also confusing. I believe so. Or was the key the 8th, the bones were the 9th? I don't remember. But this is after the bones have been found. This is before they're identified as possibly being Teresa. And he's just absolutely perplexed at how these bones could be found in his pit. And you can tell he's as shocked as everybody else is. He's not, it's not like he's, what's the word I'm looking for? He's not doing damage control. He's not making excuses for what those bones are, or it doesn't sound like he's panicking. It sounds like he's completely really bewildered on how the hell are there bones in my fire pit? That's what he says repeatedly.
Yeah, somebody else might be like, they got me, damn it. But he is like, where the heck did these things come from?
Yeah.
Yeah, he sounds concerned. Yeah, like, how could they have gotten there? Like, yeah.
They must be deer bones. They must be chicken bones. They must be sheep bones. I mean, I think that conversation happens in some other calls. But he's not shitting his pants, is my point here. He's not like, oh my God, I'm caught. It's how the hell is this happening?
He must have kind of felt the same way he did during the Penny Bernstein trial and that whole incident when Culhane identifies the hair, the blonde hair for which she did that, that now debunked follicle analysis that says, yep, that's my visual inspection says that's Steven Avery's hair, right? I mean, it's just like this evidence that comes out of nowhere. How did my hair end up on Penny? I was nowhere near her. I got 16 witnesses that say I was nowhere near. How she identifying this hair as, mine being on, right? The same type of false evidence showing up as did in that case. He must have felt, must have been sort of a deja vu for him moment almost.
It must have been. I know that it hurts to listen to some of these phone calls. My heart breaks for them because, again, these are real people. This really happened. This is really going on. This isn't some TV show that we watched. It's a documentary about real people.
Not only happened once, but it's happening twice now.
Yeah, exactly. The man has been in prison more than he's been in the free world.
It's unbelievable.
At this point, he has spent more of his life behind bars for crimes he didn't commit than he has been a free man.
Now, BB, for people who have maybe watched Ma'am but don't know their names that well, Carla Chase, is she one of the girls that walked Steven out of prison?
Yeah, she's the more slender one. Yeah,
and that's Chuck's daughter right now.
Yeah, she's Chuck's daughter.
Yeah,
she's actually the mother of that baby that he's holding that we see, and somebody says, "Who's that baby?" And he's like, "I don't even know."
I don't know. Right.
That's Carla's daughter in that clip. That's Carla's daughter.
Right. So she was married by then and had and had her own children. So even at that time, she was Carla Chase and not Carla Avery.
Actually, no, she is Carla Avery. At this point, she's Carla Avery. She's actually in the middle of planning her wedding.
Oh, okay.
But
her and Stacey are not yet married.
She's old enough to have already had a child.
Correct.
Yeah.
Awesome. So does anybody have any more comments on the phone call with Carla? The phone call with phone call number 6. You have more comments, BB? Go ahead.
It's a pretty clear-cut phone call. There's not really, other than that, she's telling how the family does not know anything, that the police are not telling them anything. They're getting it from the news as well as Steve is.
She says exactly that. We're only learning things from the media. They're not telling us anything either. She says that to him in that call. Yeah.
Well, I was particularly struck by phone call number 6, which is...
Phone call 6 is good.
Stephen's phone call with his mother. Of course, all these phone calls, again, are available on the Fall Play YouTube channel. I can also find most of them on Millbilly's channel as well. Millbilly does excellent work, got a lot of audio from the dispatch. You should tune in and listen. Phone call number 6, he's talking to his mom while the news is on. Christy, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's a very long phone call. It's 43, 44 minutes, somewhere around there. It's one of the longer ones. At some point in time, the news does come on, and they're listening intently to the news. And I believe this is the first time Steven learns that they found his blood in her vehicle, because he says something to the effect of, "How the hell is my blood in her vehicle? How does my blood get in her car?" And before they hang up, he says one more thing to Dolores that I actually wrote down, his actual quote, because my heart broke when he said it. He says, "I think they got me hooked." He knows they've got him again. There's nothing he's going to be able to do. He's seeing this happen. He does remain hopeful, but that's the first time he really says they're doing it again.
Without trying to skip ahead, I mean, through the majority of all the calls we've listened to. What call number are you up to, Christy?
I'm on 228, I believe. I'm doing them in order purposely.
Right.
She deserves a medal.
She does.
I'll take the collection for my therapy sessions later.
Yeah, if we get enough people to donate, we can actually send you to Dr. Phil.
That would be
no. We have you and Peterson on the same show.
Okay. Okay.
Would have been easier just to knock them off. But my point is, throughout the remainder of the calls, and I'm sure it continues up to, the calls numbered are going to go up to well over call number 700. He continues to profess his innocence. He continues to search for people with information. That's just not how, at some point you got enough evidence against you. A regular person's just going to give up and say, hey, look, they got me. And not going to continue to try and find stuff, because if you're guilty, you know it's not there.
Right. Absolutely.
Just to search mind for how they got this. How could that be?
Yep. Who could have done this? Who would want to do this? And not only that, but Jeff, you and I talked about this the other night. Repeatedly throughout these phone calls, he also points out, well, that's stupid. That don't make no sense. That's not how I would have done this. I would have crushed the car. There was a car crusher right there. Why would I leave it there and then go to Crivets? The guilters like that one. He was planning to crush it later. This is the 5th. He leaves for Crivets on the 5th. The cops are already sniffing around his house on the 3rd and the 4th. Does he really think he's that? If he did this, do you really think that he's that cocky that he would go out of town, leave the vehicle where it could be found, knowing the cops were poking around his house? Yeah. He would have crushed it. He says it. I wouldn't have done that. That's not what I would have done.
Yep. Yeah. Imagine if it was Chuck's week to go to Crivets instead of Earl's. I mean, the other way around. If it was Earl's week to go to Crivets instead of Chuck's, Chuck Avery, somebody came to search the yard, Chuck would have been like, "Get the frig off my property."
Possibly.
That's how Chuck is. Chuck does not, and Earl's like, "Yeah, go ahead and search."
I bet he's kicking himself in the ass for that now, but I mean, even still.
Yeah.
or is he?
Yeah. I have my thoughts, and we could sit here for hours and hours and hours. There's a lot of little things in these calls that you can pick up, and I mean, some of them might be absolutely nothing, and some of them, it's in the little details that are said, and that's why I really think listening to them is important. The things that we've picked up, and we're going to get to that in a couple seconds when we talk about our next calls.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for the listener, I have a in Thirsty for Thursday Silkman video. Dr. Silkman, a forensic DNA expert and PhD in microbiology, and he indicates to me, told me, and during my interview with him, that the total volume of Steven Avery's blood in the RAV4 is best measured in microliters, 1/1,000,000th of a liter. Literally it's like 5 or 6 drops. So if you took like a stopper, like a syringe, and it had a drop come out of it, it's on the order of like 6 or 7 drops of blood is the total amount of blood in the RAV from somebody who's actively bleeding. So, again, the whole fishiness of that story, it's not, it's just not a volume that you'd expect to.
And don't forget, he was actively bleeding through gloves that he must have been wearing because he left no fingerprint. Right. Or did he just take off the gloves to sporadically drip the part that gets me the most with the blood in the RAV4 is their theory that Steven cleaned the trailer and the garage so well that they can find no trace of her in his garage or in his trailer, yet he was that sloppy with the car.
Yeah, and at MFL too. the bullet underneath the air compressor.
Yeah.
Well, and if he didn't wear gloves and left the blood, then he had to wipe down his fingerprints, but left the blood.
Isn't it amazing?
Not to mention, like, wouldn't he have had to like stretch his finger like another inch to inch and a half and turn that key in some really twisted, cockeyed, cramped finger motion in order to get blood all the way over
I
there.
picture him having tea with the queen or something with his fingers sticking out.
Something.
It's the wrong finger too, because his finger's not on that finger. The cut's not on that finger, I mean.
It's just really, it's just odd. It's just very odd.
Yeah. So was it call number 6 where Dolores talks about the key? Because if you listen to a lot of the early calls, Steven is constantly saying they found her keys in my house.
And every time from call, the first time it is said, all the way through the calls I'm at now, which is 228, anytime somebody says something about her keys, Dolores will shout, key, one key. Who only has one key? One key. Dolores makes it a point. Every time somebody says keys, Dolores keeps bringing it up. One key. Who only has one key? Where's her house key? Everybody has keys. Even Chuck comes up with, especially a woman, she should have all kinds of stuff hanging off her keychain. I know I do.
Yeah. The little discount tag things, they've been out for a long time.
Something.
Stop and shop, gas. Yeah.
Right. Very odd that there's one single key all by its lonesome self.
Well, women back then, in particular, had, fancy doodads, a little lipstick icon, like for their keychains, and little jokes, and
the little rubber things that hold the hand sanitizer. That was all big back then. I remember having
Hot
those.
Topics was already in business, and they sold fancy little key rings.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, by far, call number 6 was the one that struck me the most, since they're watching the news and hearing all this stuff for the first time. As the one that really, he begins to sort of sense the scope of the level of evidence that they manufactured against him, and you kind of can follow the sinking feeling that he gets as they elaborate on that call.
You can, and you can feel it. You can feel it. You can hear him. He even when the news is, he says, "I'm shutting this off. I can't watch this shit anymore." That's what he says. He can't even watch it anymore. I can't imagine what he was feeling or what was going through his mind at that moment. And I'm not saying this to be ugly. They're also not intelligent people. So that had to make it even worse and even more confusing for them.
Definitely, most definitely.
Their lack of comprehending what was going on around them definitely hurt them.
And the mom says, yeah, Earl can't watch it either because it makes him a nervous wreck to watch it.
Yes. Even Alan Avery defends Earl at some point because Steven's mad at the way Earl's behaving, and Alan's just like, they've got him. I can't remember what word he used, but he says they got Earl all shook up. That's what he says. Law enforcement's got Earl all shook up.
Well, I mean, let's remember that Earl Avery was so scared when law enforcement showed up to his house. So these calls are shortly after he's arrested, right? All the Averys were interviewed on the same day, pretty much, the 9th. Steven's interview was at the Calumet jail, and he was taken away in handcuffs after that interview. They came to Earl's house on the 9th. On the 8th first. He hid under a pile of clothes. He was so nervous. I know and
gotta say it. I gotta say it. That's one big pile of dirty laundry.
And it was successful. That's the most hilarious part of that escapade, was that it was successful, because they have to come back the next day, and they actually take him for his DNA tests.
And Dolores says that it took them 5 hours to do the examination with Earl. 5 hours.
Well, I believe that's because they had him in a room and interviewed him at the same time.
Oh, okay.
I believe.
See, I've never listened to Earl interviewed yet, and I'm not sure where it happens.
Kaboom.
The thing with Earl happened all on the 9th, hiding under the clothes and going to the hospital, all on the 9th.
Yeah.
They didn't come back the next day.
And we we have the audio of the Earl Avery interview. Interestingly, the CASO says that Earl refused to speak. And we have a 45-minute call of his refusal and all the things he says during that. And God knows what we don't, what we didn't hear. If there were other things that were said, they also said, Bobby's had a pretty rough interview. We don't have that audio, obviously, but God knows what they were threatening him with.
Right. And isn't that the audio that they say doesn't exist, but yet we have an evidence photo of the audio?
Oh, no. It's sealed. I believe everybody that's tried to FOIA it has been told it's sealed.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
there's a couple calls. There's another one.
What, Jim?
I don't know. I know that from what I've been told, that it's always just been denied because it was sealed. Same with that Roger Raduin's call or interview. That's under seal. A couple of Jody's phone calls are under seal with Steven.
I'd love to know what's in those phone calls. I wonder if he said,
I think what they
haul back is so right. I got the woman coming from Auto Trader, or Redon's paying me to burn his brush or something like that.
Well, he does at some point because he says to his mother in one of the calls that he had told Jody in advance that he was selling that van.
I'm working on those calls with Steve. That's supposed to come. I'm so upset it hasn't, but I do want to say thanks to AC Rookie on Twitter. He's the one that actually FOIA'd most of these calls from December onwards. I was just reading the summary for call 6, and I find it interesting that they talk about how Earl was run off the road into a ditch, and we know that Teresa's car
by a plow.
Yeah, supposedly it was a plow truck, and Earl thought the guy was a little tipsy drunk. It doesn't appear to be anything. The guy got out, was really apologetic, and nobody got hurt.
Is this just Earl's account?
That's and it's actually like third-hand knowledge. Yes, that's Earl's account to Dolores, and Dolores repeating it to Steven.
That could be his way of explaining his car is damaged.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting.
That's a good thought. I can tell you that it was a Dodge Durango. I can tell you that Earl was driving a Dodge Durango. So find the Dodge Durango and...
I wonder what color it was.
That I do not know. I just know there was a Dodge Durango.
This talk about the car at the back of the property being hit to push in so they got in, I think that's BS. If you go on the other side of that berm, there's a clear shot right in. There was no need to go to a car.
Yeah, that is definitely a little fishy. How you could not see a car that's right in front of you, right? If you're driving in, what are you, drunk or something like that? Trying to put the car. You gotta be ultra awake, right? Ultra aware of your surroundings in that situation.
Well, I don't think they were saying that it was hit by accident. If you're referring to what Earl said to Kathleen Zellner in Making a Murderer 2, I think they were insinuating that the car was purposely pushed to get out of the way.
The car.
I know that's the explanation. However, there's two things. One, as I said, if you go on the other side of that berm, there's a clear path in there, so there was no need to go on that side. Two, Chuck and Earl, I believe in Queso, both say that the back there was open.
Right, in 2005 it was.
So, and like, there's a call, I believe, where Chuck and Steven are talking, and Chuck mentions blocking off other areas since all of this has happened. And Steven asks him about back there, and Chuck's like, no, I never really thought of that.
Right, they were blocking off Avery Road because the media kept coming to the house. So, and you're right, that the back should have been, I think that's why Chuck wasn't thinking about the back, was because he was protecting Dolores and Barbara at that point because they were going nuts with all the media that was coming down there. But he should have definitely thought to close off the back too.
So like, my point is that sounds like it was open the entire time.
Right.
So,
right.
He has to have been thinking that it was the other side that was open because the other side has that car blocking. So
right, and they have a flyover video to help them.
exactly.
Right, and if it's one of the family, they know exactly what's back there, right? If it's the cops, then they know from the flyover video exactly what route they have to take without having to push a car out of the way.
I really feel like it was somebody close to Steven. I really feel like it was somebody that knew the comings and goings. I really do.
I agree.
It's Theory Thursday.
I agree. It's a family member.
It's a family member, and I don't believe law enforcement killed her. And I just think it was a perfect storm of law enforcement stretching the truth. Whoever the real killer really is, just leaving little tidbits to point to Steven, knowing that law enforcement was going to jump on it. Law enforcement didn't like Steven, and that was common knowledge. Law enforcement didn't like the Averys.
What I find a little crazy is when Buting and Strang are putting forth alternate suspects, and they put forth Earl, and it gets denied because they have no motive. And I'm
wasn't
thinking,
any motive for Steven either.
Why wouldn't they put forth the motive in regards to Marie Avery? They're upset with his transgressions with their daughter. In one of these calls, Steve talks about how that's what his public defender, Loy, that's what his whole defense was going to be, that Earl and Candy conspired to set Steven up because they were upset with what was happening with their daughter, Marie.
And so they killed Teresa to do it?
Or helped in the framing.
It was going to be their defense. And this set Earl off because Earl ends up calling Steve and just ripping him to shreds. And like he was very nasty to his mom as well, which is kind of crazy. But there's a call where Steven talks to Earl, and Earl's really upset because he feels like Steven's ruining his life because Steven has informed him that his public defender is going to point the finger at him and Candy. And so Earl really lays into Steven, and Dolores comes to Steven's defense, and then Earl just rips into her as well.
I'd kind of be upset if I were Earl about that.
Well, I agree. But however, I feel like I don't understand why like Strang and Buting wouldn't have put forth this defense as a motive. They could be
Didn't
Denny
they try?
suspects.
Didn't they try? Didn't every Denny suspect they tried to put forward, they were denied, and the ruling was that they couldn't list anybody by name except for Brendan.
Well, I thought they let it go through without listing any motive for anyone because Steve didn't have any. And I often wondered why they didn't have their investigator dig into these 8 people or whatever that Steve does name.
Did put forth Denny suspects. However, they were denied these Denny suspects because they had no motive for these Denny suspects. They met the other thresholds because it's 3-pronged. You have to have motive, means, opportunity.
Right.
And they had those with Earl and several of other suspects like Bobby and Chuck. However, they were denied on motive. But here we have a motive for Earl, but they didn't put that forth because
yeah, well, that's
if
a good
they
point.
had of, they would have had Earl.
That's actually very interesting. We had actually had a private conversation, you and I, Kaboom, we were you were informing me about some of your theories about why some of these calls were missing, and you indicated that some of them, your feeling was some of them around the Marie investigation were redacted. So that's an interesting fit here, isn't it? That
Yes.
that the potential motive of Earl Avery. You can't get those calls because they won't let them out.
It makes one wonder what's in those calls.
Yeah, it just does that help establish Earl's possible motive as a Denny suspect? And were they thinking even back then? We're not even gonna. One of the angles we're going to try and take is not let them name anybody else.
And we all know that they have no problems hiding evidence that gives other people motive, because look what they did with the CD on Bobby's computer.
That's why that's so important, is because with that, they have motive for Bobby, and he meets the other thresholds because he's got bones in his barrel. He was there when she was there. So that's why that CD issue is so important.
Of course it is, but
Motive.
they had their man. They had Steven. They had tunnel vision big time for whatever reason, whether it was just because they wanted to see him go down, whether it was because they really thought he did it, whether it was because of the 36 million. At the end of the day, they thought they had their man and it didn't matter. Nothing mattered.
I think it was mostly they were embarrassed. He was embarrassing them.
Zomer actually lists it twice, right? One is as a Brady violation for not allowing her to impugn Bobby's testimony during his, because it was pretty damaging testimony, obviously, but also the lack of allowing to include him as a suspect, right? So both of those things are explicit in Zollner's current brief.
Correct.
So yeah, definitely. Well, as we often do with Theory Thursday, we went off into a little bit of a hole. That was really interesting stuff. I love it. Any more comments on that, Kaboom?
No, I think I'm good.
So the next set of calls, were we going to talk about a phone call with Chuck, Christy? That
yes. Let's
call
talk
number
about
152.
Call number 152 and maybe call number 152 didn't really strike me that much until I listened to call number 172 also. And the reason these two calls are important is because something is said in these calls, and we know
what was
that.
the approximate date of these calls, if you have that.
All right. 152, call number 152 is from December 6th. So if I remember correctly, December 6th is the evening of his court date. He went to court. He had his court hearing on the 6th. He got arrested. He goes to court a couple days later. That's when they put his bail on. That's when they charge him with murder. His next court date is December 6th. So he's talking to Chuck that evening, December 6th at 21:09. So what's that? 9:09 p.m. at night, he calls him. And then call number 172 is on the 8th to Debbie Klump. Two things. I can't take her seriously. I'm sorry.
Who is Debbie Klump?
Debbie is a woman who wrote Steven a letter and included her phone number, and then Steven started talking to her. We'll get back to her in a minute, but those are the two phone calls. Chuck is 152 and Debbie is 172. In 152, Steven says something to Chuck. They're talking about the fire, about how could there be a body in the fire. Steven says something about Brendan was there. Brendan was there when I had the fire. If there was a body, Brendan would have seen the body. Brendan didn't see nothing. All that was in that fire was brush. That's pretty much exactly what he says. I write it down, but I don't really pay much attention to it. I keep on listening. I get to call 172 with Debbie, and there's a little bit of a relationship starting. Well, for Debbie anyway. I'm not sure Steven's really into it. I think Steven's saying what he needs to say because this girl's willing to help. And she's willing to do things. So there's some flirting back and forth.
This girl also has the potential of having money coming soon too.
Correct. And yeah, she's a whole nother.
She has
a whole nother
dairy
podcast.
farm or something, right? She owns a dairy farm.
Well, no, it's not. That's how she presents herself at first. Later on, we find out that it's actually, she's also married. She doesn't tell Steven at first that she's married. The dairy farm actually belongs to the family of her husband. They just live on it. And they run it. It's she doesn't own it, but his family does. And she's under the impression she's coming into money because I believe the 185 acres is about to be sold. And she's thinking she's getting her percentage from him. I don't know how that plays out yet because it's just happening now. So I'm not sure what happens. But yeah, Steven thinks that she's getting $81,000. And she's totally willing to fork over this $81,000 to help her cute little Steven get out because she just wants to be with him so bad. So call 152, we have Steven talking about Brendan not seeing a body in the fire. And call 172, Steven talks about how sweaty he gets during sex. I'm pretty sure that if we really listen to these calls and we pick out these little meaningless parts, law enforcement, Ken Kratz, whoever was listening to these calls, took phrases Steven said out of context and used it to make their story. Because what does Ken Kratz say in his press conference? He keeps talking about Brendan's sweaty uncle.
And how he stopped in the middle of raping to answer the door, half dressed, dripping in sweat. Yeah.
Steven makes a comment about dripping with sweat when he's having sex.
Wow. And doesn't that fit nicely into Kratz's narrative?
It really does.
And law enforcement's pursuing Brendan to the extent they did. What a gold mine they hit. They must have hit when they found out that Brendan was actually in front of the fire too. And the date of that call is around December, you said? Just around his court date.
The call with Chuck about the body is on the 6th after court. The call with Debbie about sweating during sex is on the 8th. So
it takes a long time to listen to these calls. It takes a long time to listen to these calls, as you know. It wouldn't surprise me, if they sick somebody to listen on these calls, and it does take. And it's almost Christmas, so maybe they don't get to it till January. So maybe it's not till late February that they actually get to this one, because it does take a long time, and they are limited in the bodies that they have.
It is.
The time frame almost fits for when they haul in Brent.
And just like how Christy is sitting here going through them with a fine tooth comb and making notes and writing down stuff, they probably are doing the same thing with these calls.
I'm pretty sure they have a jailer listening to them. There's that one log that was entered as evidence where they have a little summary of what every call was about. I think it's Exhibit 76 in Zellner's big brief. And so Steven talks, so they have it written down where Steven talks about how Barb left at 9:00 that night. Mm-hmm. There was another one where so that was the 31st, and on the 30th, there's talk about how Steven had Brendan over, and they were in the garage.
Yep.
And there was a fight between Jody and Steve, so there was multiple calls because she was hanging up on him, or he was hanging up on her, one or the other. And then there was a call, I think, on the 2nd where he talks about the first of the 2nd, where he talks about how something's happened to the carpet cleaner and he might return it. So yeah, I'm pretty sure they had someone regularly listening to these.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to take a look at it too.
It's gonna be because what I think what Christy, the type of things to me it seems that Christy's picking up on are almost sort of incidental things that, looking back, you could see how to use them to help paint a picture. Whereas if you were maybe listening to them live, it's not clear to me that a jailer would have been able to have the foresight to be able to write down some of the things that they said. I mean, these police calls are probably listened to and re-listened to, and maybe even re-listened to again.
And I'm sure Kratz probably listened to some of the more juicier ones too.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that they were listening in and following up on Steven and knowing basically his whereabouts, his habits, and things he was doing all during that time that Jody was in jail before he got arrested. Like Christy mentioned, I mean, now it's starting to show the dots are connecting. They had to be listening in.
That is the whole point of both interviews with Steven, was to find out what he was doing so they can build a story around that. And that's what screwed him, because they don't pressure him for any details on anything in particular other than the blood in the RAV, I think. Because they don't mention anything in his 9th interview about a cleanup spot.
Right. Yep.
They don't mention anything about the hood latch, going in and touching the hood latch, anything about I can't recall if they mentioned the key or not, but I don't think they did. It was a very soft interview, and segueing actually into another call where he talks to Emily Matesic from Channel 2's. She was super aggressive, and I was stunned. It was question after question after question, and she was unrelenting, and not one slip up by him.
And they were all pointed questions too.
Yes.
They were,
Yeah, I agree. I saw that call as well.
He should have been the head investigator.
It's striking to me how often during the calls it comes up that he says, "My lawyers don't want me to talk to anybody," and he's on the phone with the media. He's telling his family the stuff he's not supposed to be telling. Number one, and number two, he's talking to the media against his lawyer's wishes. He does that at least 3-4 times, and probably more.
So much
Again,
that he does it so much that Eric Loy calls Dolores and has Dolores yell at Steven. "Shut up," is what she says.
Yep.
Your lawyer says, "Shut your mouth."
But yet again, if you listen to these phone calls, you start to realize that he's made a decision on his own to advocate for himself, and this is his only way that he can do that.
Absolutely. He thinks that he has to shout his story from the top of the rooftops because they're just burying him. He's standing in quicksand and he's sinking, and he knows it, and he is desperate, and he is grasping at everything, and he just wants somebody to friggin' hear him.
There's a call where Loy actually calls him and tells him that, you shouldn't be going on the media. You've actually you potentially hurt our chances with talking to Earl because we want to talk to Earl. And then you didn't help your case by talking about taking a lie detector test. Like that's a huge, big discussion we've got to have. He's just befuddled, and he's hoping that the talking to the media is gonna help him look innocent in the media's eyes, because he is, and he just wants the world to know that.
There were a lot of people around. He does have some support, and there were not an insignificant number of people who thought that this was a setup by the cops. But if he had done a better job with the media, he might have actually helped his cause, and he might have got a call from Loy saying, let's call these guys up every day. But he did a terrible job. I
honestly think he was so overwhelmed with he was getting shanked big time. I mean, and he was starting to see it unfold very quickly, and him being behind bars for this, and it sinking in that I'm going down for this and I didn't do it, I think confused him, so overwhelmed him that he could not have helped himself by speaking to the media as much, because of him being so, I think he was overwhelmed.
I find it a little interesting how he consistently talks about how they don't have much evidence on me. He's just not understanding the reality of how serious.
Till he finds out
what they do have. Well, not even, because he doesn't think having bones in his backyard and him admitting a fire is damaging. He doesn't think his blood in the vehicle is damaging.
Well, if you measure the evidence by mass, it's not a lot.
I think he's thinking what any one of us would have been thinking. I didn't do it, so there's no effing way that's going to sink my ship, because I didn't do it. There's no way.
I understand this, but I mean, I think it's also just he doesn't grasp.
He doesn't grasp. Yeah.
How damaging this truly is.
Right.
I mean, so my take, one of my takes on that, and in alignment with what you're saying, is that if you listen to that very first call that he makes to the media, if you put it in the context of the sequence, he's on the phone all day. Oh my God. We'll come back to that point in a second. But if you sort of take the call in the context of the calls around it, there's some level of logical procession, that he's running this through his mind. But if you put yourself in the perspective of the interviewer or even the audience, what he's saying is barely coherent, and it's hard to figure out what he's talking about.
It don't make no sense.
Don't make no sense.
It only makes sense to us because we know what was going on and we know what he was talking about. But the layperson just getting on the phone with him, not knowing who Chuck is, who Earl is, what the hell Steven's talking about with blood in the sink, he didn't present his story the right way.
No, it was very poorly. He's not a good public speaker.
No, he's not even a good private speaker, and he does no, just no.
Right. So getting a little sensitive to the time here.
I say thanks for having me, and again, thanks for AC for getting most of these calls, and Zoe for getting them up, and Millbilly for getting them up.
Yep. We really appreciate that. People are spending their own money, and it's a lot of time. If you think about how much money people make per hour, people are putting hours and hours and hours of this, and frankly, many times they're not even getting thanked, and even more times they're getting criticism from other people for putting out their theories and whatnot. We have to remember that we're all a community, and we are all trying to raise awareness of this, and the more people that get on, the more people that hear about this case, the more outrage there's going to be here. I'd like to thank you, Kaboom, for showing up. And spending your time here with us and all the work that you've done. So does anybody have any closing comments for this Thursday?
Thank you, Kaboom, for everything. I keep repeatedly listening over and over for certain things in each and every phone call, so thank you.
So I want to say thanks again for having me.
And thanks for letting us post them. That's very nice of you.
Drop a note in Discord letting us know what ones are the important ones. That's really helpful. People like Christy don't want to skip. I'm afraid not to skip. Okay.
There's just certain things that I want to know about. Like I wanted to know about the whole Marie thing, and I found another good couple calls that exposed that whole joke mess.
Oh really? I can't wait to talk about. You're talking about the joke that happened between Mike Osmond.
Yeah. So like he hates Mike. He never talks to Mike. He wouldn't say anything of this nature, even as a joke. So like these calls are just exposing all these things that people hang their hats on with his guilt. It's amazing.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. And with that, this has been a Foul Play production.